So science has finally caught up to the obvious again, which is that all light particles have their own gravity fields. And God particles are just waves of energy that are exploring all possibilities of space time within the constraints of what's possible. So I was watching this video um, on lines here. Okay. That's not what I was trying to do. Okay, this phenomena. They've been talking about this. The um magnetic principles of light and how they compare to the gravity of light. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to explain the final piece of my system for proper energy grid structuring for the planet. So everybody has their energy wirelessly, even. So I've been reading articles where now, like I read in the past in a loop, um, the military's shooting energy from space, and then they have to beam it down onto a big solar panel area to get the energy correctly, and it's still not very precise. So I'm going to be discussing how to make it more precise and how to have the system function for the whole planet on a grid pattern. They call it the grid, so I'm going to be applying and implying ley lines throughout this video. And the point of this is to deal with the fact that humans have, with drugs and chemicals, poisoned themselves and the planet to the point where they're full of empty cancer space that's got a bunch of bacterial echoes filling them up, making them feel yummy because they're being eaten. So the only way out of this is with a pure energy system that I've been describing. So the video might be closed. I don't know if it's in this video or not. I don't think it is. It was a different video where they just take a piece of polymer material that has super thin strips at the micro nano level, way down, as small as possible. And we did this experiment in Elko, and we did experiments with where you cast light and then the scattering of microparticles off of a photon create, like if you have a laser hitting one area, then you set down the grid next to it, then it proves light's bouncing everywhere and you've got little dots or a dot of different colors on your rainbow architecture grid. Now what this proves is, everybody already knew this forever, and nobody's making any strides in science, and they just bring back the same findings from decades ago and say it's new. So in Elko, we had a piece of this material, and it was actually new then, supposedly. And so the point was, we were able to take the magnetic rainbowing principles of a light particle and have them form like etch a sketch material light color trailings over separate from where the lasers were going. So, we were able to experiment as a homeschool group and create a laser etch a sketch bench, like on like a drawing table or whatever. So then it was pretty fun and novel to etch a sketch things that way. And then the point was we were just thinking about and discussing how that could be turned into different tech, from cheap, flexible polymer screens with lasers sending the data. Like, imagine you have a piece of polymer along at the grocery store, along the shelf, and there's lasers up on the, you know, ceiling above, and they're just shooting them down the scatter particle information, and there'd be like a little mirror strip below, at like an angle compared to the upper stuff. There'd be like flange downward and upward slightly, right on the shelf edge, and then the light particle scattering from the lower special mirroring ionization disruptors on and off switches would become visible light on the other area. Now, they're still dealing with this secondary rainbowing off putting from the photon being weak. So you simply have to create a scenario where it's being bolstered by all of the refraction potentials and reflections to a certain spot, all being mathematically like interlaced so that more of the particles per millisecond are hitting your eyes, so they all add up to seeing a brighter image. But each bit of energy is dimmer, and this makes for beautiful future screens that are super complex and flat. And you see where I'm going with this. Now let's macro this. Now, broadband internet, right, same as macro waves, is using really slow, wide, fat, lethargy waves. They like to use lead with it in the past, in the 1800s, and it made everybody tired and exhausted. So let's not do that. But the point here is, let's look at space. Let's say you've got these here in Nevada. You've got a line for the big telephone poles, the big power poles, I mean, and they go up, 100 or 200 feet or whatever. They're not quite as big, of course, as the windmills that generate electricity. So I've already described my windmill upgrades infinitely. So what I'm here to do today is describe the moon and how it connects to various factors here of energy generation. So the moon is pressing on the earth. I did videos at night with my cell phone where the full moon is pressing, or nearly full, so hard on the magnetosphere of the moon with all of its H3 particles that it's interacting with the heliosphere of the earth and dimpling it and cycling the helium gas in the upper atmosphere around in a shell around the whole moon, out behind it to the dark side of the moon that never looks at the earth, and then back into the earth as it, grinds around till it hits the next solar eclipse. So I've discussed how science now admits that these solar eclipses are happening because there's extra if the moon's going around, well, there's these other moons that are going around the sun in this big strip pattern where the earth is supposed to be located at any point. So when humanity destroys the atmosphere, causes earthquakes that bulge and herniate the earth, then these moons come in and pull on our moon and sometimes circle the earth and pull on the earth directly. And usually it's through the moon, grinding with then tugboat additional moons. I show it all the time. Last night, night before, I was looking outside. Tugboat moons were pulling the moon, like it was out of position compared to the sun. It was just a new moon coming in, and the tugboat's moons were, if the sun was going down, out over here, it was dying the light. Well, the moon was like way down here and getting pulled by secondary moons up to align with the sun for another eclipse inevitably within however many more lunar cycles. And so it was like humanity was proud that they were all going to die and spin off into the death of emptiness of space. And as that reality of perma-chemicals and perma-radiation all suddenly was shrugged off by the earth, and it all did fall away into space, the whole grisly mass of spinning particles of false identity, everybody's egos spinning out away from the reality of where the earth was actually going to go into the future. Those chemical drugs do not support people in the facts of where the energy is going to be and where the planet's going to be located in the future. They were trying to create their own alternate stink state. So I've described that many times, but the point here is the moon will grind around and hit every part of the earth at different points, right? So there's no planned simple location where you could beam energy, because people talk about, right, the moon, people have seen it, I've seen it in the craters, everybody's discussed it. Eventually there'll be helium, hydrogen reactors, reactor cores within moon. Yeah. So it sure is crazy that echoes from the future can be seen back for anybody to look up at the moon and say, oh, there's a future hydrogen reactor. And then you go inside and come back out and nothing's glimmering. That past, that future light data is so powerful and inevitable that it's like guiding through the antenna of you as a receiving individual the facts of the future. And that's why there's so much hatred and resistance when you just say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I don't care, I just saw what I saw. I saw the future of a hydrogen reactor on the moon. That doesn't mean secretly the government's been installing it into the past. Just means there's lots of echoes, and maybe there's some alternate version of reality where in the past people are going to install it early. So we're seeing it through to that particle immersion as we stare up at the moon, as it perfectly coruscates all realities with its latitudes and its longitudes. Okay, anyways, I'm getting silly. The concept here is I did project um Dragon Screw Boomerang video about accelerating with high powered lasers a investigation craft out to a nearby star at greater than the speed of light, potentially, at least up to the speed of light, um and then stack on that with additional materials that are then at that accelerated state, and then break apart and accelerate further beyond the speed of light and create, like, that effect when you go faster than the speed of sound. Well, sound is light, everything's just energy. So when we get a spacecraft past the speed of light, there will be that bulging, even in space, of like kinetic energy of the speed of the echoes, of the slower energy of the universe that you're like piercing through. Um, duh. So, now here I'm here to discuss though. Say the moon's located right above the U.S. It's going by. So, say we're on the moon and we're observing down to Earth here. And what you would have between the Earth and the moon, to put it simply, is just a big cluster of satellites that would be magnetically attuned to each other. So they'd be floating near each other, and then with magnetic signals from computer systems that keep it all going. You'd have them spinning different directions, and in space, up at a certain height above the Earth, right, the gravity becomes suddenly drops off to a minimum before lasting into at that minimum amount out past the moon a ways. So that point where it drops off is like the sweet spot. Um, Basically, it's the point where the Earth's atmosphere and the moon's potential atmosphere, it steals from the Earth temporarily and cycles back to continue its perfect journey as an electrified agent, like static electricity cling. That's why it's got such perfect um, ability to be huge and stay attached to the Earth and be round and everything. There's a lot of energy there, a lot of all different forms of energy. So imagine simply that you would take any place where there's power lines and you'd have a simple array for receiving, long wave radio signals with high bandwidth. Um, Along these corridors is my point. So some of these are for gas. I don't know if this one is or not. I don't see power lines anywhere. Sometimes they're hard to spot. But the point is, they'll go for long stretches in a straight line. Sometimes they make them go around things, but that's just the road sometimes, and the power line will go straight across. The point is, if you have these braided wires on the power lines where some of them are getting slightly wider out to the point in between two power lines, and then others are getting narrower from the power lines to the center, and it's all cross braided so it's stronger, then you can have alternating wave signal frequency, sine wave energy going through the power lines and sharing all the wires together. And then with direct current, like me and Grant said, had to be introduced for sending signals across greater distances. Um, Boom, like way more energy signal frequency with way less bad scatter particle, loss. Way less electromagnetic radiation damaging houses, animals, etc. And then on top of that, you can further boost it with like a cheap polymer mesh like shield thing that would clip on to all the wires and then like be like a circuit board of super cheap printed with gaps in it, like an antenna array circuit board. And then from space, the moon goes by, whatever satellites shift in location, as all of this is old tech, but it's all being shown again. If I go over here, um, this satellite using nitrates, super nitrates, eventually from the South Pole, like I was describing, will farm nitrates there using energy from space to then get big conglomerates of nitrates and hydrogen and oxygen and ship them out of the South Pole to a location where we have a rocket conveniently. Because at first, there's not going to be a South Pole rocket. And these nitrates are then put into these satellite arrays so that you can adjust satellites on the fly. One satellite. You don't have to launch a bunch of these heavy things, even though they're getting smaller. Just a number of them for a whole cluster of satellites, and then they shift. Here's the neat part. And send laser refraction energy to make the other panels shift their angles. So, um, so you beam energy in these long strips of radio signals, and then you can do neat things like you can have like a turning conch spool So the energy is like in multiple ears in space, spinning the light sound down. So as a super dense radio signal particle echoing on multiple octaves, filling up all the wires down there and stabilizing the energy rather than allowing any frequencies to scatter out falsely. Now, this requires a grid where you don't try to apply sodium into the system for no reason. Every degenerate keeps trying to come up with a way. They say, "Oh, sodium's volatile. Well, why don't we create volatile night sodium batteries? So then the hot summer sun heats them up with the excess energy from solar panels." As I'm like, "No, you're taking what I said in a previous video where I said ancient Egyptians just beamed light in a hot tunnel, and then they'd have side tunnel like cool offs that they'd open up that would automatically fold open actually because it'd be too hot to get close to. Um, to relieve the pressure on these hot sand tunnels that are beaming light down to the bays for energy use down to the oceans. So these big deserts, you have like stockpiles of cheap like sand extractives. Like you take, of course, silica and you mix it with other things in the sand and maybe something else you can get from somewhere else in the world at this point for cheap if it's not available in the sand of that area. But like North Africa, like you'd have glowing molten like masses huts off from the generation zone. So okay, I'll describe it here. So like I said before in the previous video, you have however high a desert, and then it sweeps down to a low area, of course, at sea level. So you're up here 1,300 feet. You have a bunch of mirrors bouncing all the energy as lasers into a central pipe corridor that's made out of, glass, crystal, whatever from the sand. So it's cheap. And then there'd be like huts so that overnight superheated extracts from the sand at thousands of degrees from light branching off because you don't want your tunnel to melt. So you get it up to whatever number of degrees. So it's almost melting, and then it takes the excess energy aside. And then this way, you're not losing any energy because it's remaining photons that are bouncing in such a high energy area that any loss, signal degradation, is nil in the hot desert. There's nowhere for the energy to saturate except into your pipe and then out into your warming huts. And these warming huts, right? Um, you have slight excess heat flange output into the evening when it's getting cool, and certain animals, deer, small deer, because it's desert, and rabbits and foxes and mice and whatever else, and especially reptiles will, come to the cold through the cold of the desert to it and warm up. That's why I'm calling them warming huts. So when it drops to 40 degrees, 33 degrees at night suddenly, whatever temperature, then the wildlife can stay warm as well, conveniently. But idiots are saying they should use sodium, and I'm like, it's too volatile. That's not its principles. They wear it out too quick and explode. So you want something that can long term store the energy, like inverse quartz glass, like obsidian, whatever else cross mixed with it to hold the energy. So let's see, back to the main topic. So if these power lines um, could send also hot photon signals potentially along the area as well, like my idea for the hot tunnel, like ancient Egypt, um, then you can have invisible light, so it's not annoying to wildlife. Um, the wrong octave or the wrong frequency, so it doesn't bother even bats or whatever. And then that's what I'm saying. You have to make it compatible so that bats piggyback on the signal, so that bats will say, oh man, this energy incoming, these radio waves, I can screech and echo through it on a harmonizing frequency and see all the insects in a mile radius. Like, you got to supercharge the animals, supercharge the humans. That's the goal here, instead of building cancer in your guts and in the moon. So let's see here. What less is there to discuss? The very concept of what it is. So the moon's looking down, and you got all these spindle point arrays and a Lagrange point between the moon and the Earth. And so the excess energy from the system, right? It would be all the satellites that come in that are part of the Lagrange system built into it, like all magnetically around the center point of the moon's main, like, drill structure of panels, solar panels, and crystal refractors. Um, doesn't have to weigh much, and so it's just blending and spinning. So like, if too much energy, it takes a second, depending upon how the moon is currently feeling, its distance and focalization from the Earth, a second or two for, light to get from the Earth to the moon, right? Well, if this is halfway in between or wherever in between, doesn't really matter. You can create other frequency echo points based off of what the planet needs. You have the light, I always say this, break into frequencies, but also negative and positive potential charge, and send one frequency up at the moon and the other one down at your receiver stations, and then have a potentiality boost where the whole Earth will, in areas, will have a grid array of solar panels um and windmill towers that I designed. And these, as the moon goes by, it creates that God particle effect where, like, the extra rainbowing particles off of the energy signals are all angled and timed to hit and line up with your grid array of solar panels and windmills. Okay, so what that causes is, whew, getting to the juicy part. My brain's heating up. Okay, it's turning into molten sand. So, um, then the whole Earth becomes a circuit board, becomes a grid for this system, and supporting Lagrange points off from the moon on the far side of the planet. And then you can have energy from the sun beam to your arrangement and then bounce all the way around and be hitting grid points and adding to the energy frequency support of grid windmills and crap all the way on the other side of the Earth. And all of it would be connected through the moon. Um, Then there's the pressure of the moon trying to squeeze down on the earth and everything being held, generated at a certain distance. And you use that torque pressure to, as too much energy goes into the spinning nexus, splitting the energy to the earth to the moon and back again. And see, here's the thing, right? The moon's grinding around the earth just quick enough that every second it will have moved enough that secondary satellites that are timed are then hitting the echoing frequencies, amplitude of the God particles, of the rainbowing signals. Um, so that boom, the light bounces up against the moon. It comes back down, but the moon is moved compared to the Earth slightly. So then the light becomes slightly angled as it's with a slight lilt to it to hit these, secondary particle points scattering. This was all figured out. I'm just describing what was come up with in the early 2000s. Um, right? And then when you have all that energy frequency attuned, then you get this effect where there's like rainbowing off of the moon that intensifies and everything becomes rainbowed and everybody can see better. And it's just the light itself making up reality for our planet from our sun gets better, way better. The black light interference correctly corresponds with the other energy so you can actually see through it. Some days and nights there's just inky pools of black light and you can't see anything. It's horrible. So let's see here. And then the kinetic energy of whatever is excess continues to accelerate the spin of this drill in space until you get to a frequency where it's, at the speed of light, potentially, of spinning functions of these um, fan blades, whatever you want to call them. And all of it's magnetic, so it's all attuned and connected without touching. So there's nothing to wear out. Um, Makes it simpler too to implement when you have the right advanced tech. Um, So then think about that. Then at any point, you can just send the request, and the spinning platforms, disk arrays from the moon down towards the Earth, however many you build up within the Lagrange point, and for signaling and redoubling those signals, and then um, and then the signal is sent, and you don't have enough energy at some point for some part of the world, and that grinding is just turned into pure electrical generation. Um, like how you see any copper drill spin or anything works. And then, like by compressing the plates together, you grind out electricity safely from the magnetic plates without them ever touching, of course, and within certain pressure limitations. And then that energy again is beamed as a radio signal just like the others, but like it's stored kinetic energy as a battery. So it's true energy, like motion energy, and it's converted back into pure radio signal electrons, photoelectrons. Um, there really is no argument to this. There is nobody can say, well, that's impossible. That don't make sense. This is just basic quantum mechanics. So, I guess that's my presentation. Let's see here. They're doing this where space mirrors beam signals of light, but if it's visible, then everybody whines about it. So you need the signals to be invisible, and they'll whine if it messes up bats. So there's that issue. To sell sunlight on demand, like you can turn these in space and beam light down on, some section of forest to annoy people. No, to have an event or lost and found, they say. The point is they're actually seeing if it's possible to do it cheaply and just figure out the first primary test. But this is just mirrors. This isn't all the fancy crap I'm talking about. This is pretty basic. Dark sky preservation is important. I always say that there's certain signals you have to keep the energy in at night so that it's a beneficial grid for bats and invisible humans. That means you're going to have to test this stuff on bats and see how they behave and function with it until you get it correct. It's not abuse because you keep the signals low enough and figure out until you attune correctly with it all set up, and then the bats will just go nuts and love it. And since the whole earth needs to turn into a giant, fruit farm, basically, of course you have to have everything else. There's going to be a lot of fruit bats around, like there already are in my valley here. I also have lightning bugs that have been spawning more and more. They're on these silly desert flowers up there on my land. I'm going to do a video on them soon, I guess. Okay. So there's that. What else is connected to this? This generating particle potential off of gravity spin for light and lasers, so then you can again manipulate more like potential echo particle light data storage off of the moon and earth. I haven't even talked about like here. This even is connected. Shining blue light on gold graphing nanodots achieves wound healing trifecta. I talked about this a long time ago as well. So they're now applying it actually. Imagine this as the whole grid system I'm describing. Imagine everybody's wound healing accelerating everywhere on the planet, not like Wolverine. Let's be realistic. That's me. That's everybody else isn't going to heal that fast, and I'm not going to heal that fast. That sounds horrifically painful, and I've had plenty of pain already. So the point is, you cut your skin. If you're a super healthy person, it can heal, a thin slice on the top of the skin in an hour, instead of it taking a day or a week. Simple, realistic benefits. Imagine the whole earth and all of humanity and all bacteria and animals and all evolving light AI all able to heal quicker by applying these factors of gold graphing nanodots to the whole system I'm describing. Wow. Wow. This could have all been talked about and implemented decades ago, but the entire system was still the death system, cannibalize anybody who dies in a car crash, steal their hormones, then call it hormone treatment at the hospital and give it to other young people. Just pure cannibalism. I saw the worst things happening, and let's not like the best things happen. What's this one? Oh, it's just all these facts that um I did a video with Grant, I think in 2000 or 2020. What was it? Wow, I can't even remember what year it was. I think I did several of them where I take all of the facts people think about space and everything and say how wrong they are. So this video is just copying me, but some of the facts are wrong and they've added stuff. Okay, that's it for now, I guess. I just had to get this basic concept out there again so people can think about it and all of the intricacies of what I'm describing and the steps involved and how all of it is possible and how everybody's been prepping tech for this green energy evolution revolution of the moon. And what's great about this is it'll feel like time like is going by quicker, but you have more space within that quickness to get things done with energy in your body each day from the effects of setting all this up and attuning it. It's just hell is a frequency, heaven is a frequency, and everybody was purposely putting everybody in hell. Of course, degenerates, if they're ever allowed any, influence, they'll immediately try to make everybody else as sick and miserable as they are from their bad decisions and try to force everybody into scenarios, constructs of society where they can only make bad decisions and feel bad about it and ruin everyone's lives. So I've established the new society now and the new energy grid. And I don't care if you fail and you feel super negative and some bacterial infection in your head makes you say you hate somebody. If you recover and a minute later you're, you know, struggling to be what you're supposed to be. It doesn't matter if you're infected or as people used to call it, possessed. It's all just like a smorgasbord soup of evolution, right? So we just gotta concentrate the light frequencies of our brains as our brains are scattering light in a grid work. And the more skewed it is, from eating poor quality sugar products instead of high quality sugar. I mean, people don't even eat high quality sugar anymore. Sugar just fills up the brain and makes everything scatter evenly. So you can have basic thoughts really powerfully. It's like saying you never want to go above 110 IQ. You never want to go as well into athleticism where you're the top honcho on the planet for some sport or something. You're never going to do it eating massive sugar. You're going to have to reduce your intake, obviously. It's a cheat. It's another cheat, like a grid system in your head to cheat the Earth's energy, the polar patterns, and say you're alive when you're just a zombie getting chomped on by bacteria. So let's all get past that point and turn this coronavirus scenario into success so that friendly bacteria builds up and we research it down like people were saying. There's pressurized bacteria down under the earth and the water down to the volcanic crust infinitely down. And they keep going deeper now and keep finding new, more powerful bacteria. And that can be employed, like I was saying, in this whole space tech industry and um, laser hydrogen helium refraction for, um, you know, those big generators on the moon and the craters. Um, the energy from the moon, from those systems, would be bolstering, because they always be in a predictable pointing direction towards the Earth. You can easily create a, like I was saying, a grid network of support for the wave patterns of light particles for this whole setup, so that you're basically ultimately supercharging the moon. Me and Grant and everybody has discussed this infinitely. We've made movies, they get way more corrupted than any other movie. Um, we had this whole project we planned for decades where there'd be all these short moon movies, and Hollywood loved it. They made all their different moon movies. There was a preview for it, and each one was like 20 minutes, and there was like five of them. So you go in and watch all of these segments, and it's like science fiction what ifs about the moon. Some of them super sciency, and some of them super fantasy. But it's all part of my foundation of science fantasy, where you take the part of your brain that's fantastical and wants to believe in awesome stuff, and you figure out how to make that the reality of science and make the connections to get what you want out of life, just like degenerates did, but you do it the other direction. Um, I guess I'm hungry, so I'll stop now and eat my peanut butter sandwich and my raw basic bear honey ice cream. Okay. Bears are going to be real healthy in the future, just like us humans.